Before George Weah, no African footballer had ever won the Ballon d'Or. Many believed it couldn't be done. The award belonged to Europe. The biggest clubs, the biggest nations, the biggest footballing powers. Then a young man from Liberia changed everything. Not just for himself, not just for his country, but for an entire continent. Because George Weah didn't simply become a great footballer. George Weah made Africa believe. Born in Monrovia, Liberia, in 1966, Weah's journey began far from football's grandest stages. No luxury academies, no elite facilities, no guarantees. Just talent, determination, and a dream bigger than the circumstances around him. Millions of young African children dreamed of becoming professional footballers. Few believed one of them could become the best player in the world. George Weah intended to prove them wrong. As a young player, his talent was impossible to ignore. He was powerful, explosive, fearless. But what made him different was his ability to create something from nothing. A half chance became a goal. A crowded defense became open space. A lost cause became an opportunity. Defenders feared him. Supporters loved him. And eventually Europe began to notice. One man noticed more than most. A young coach called Arsene Wenger. Wenger saw something special, something extraordinary, and he brought George Weah to Monaco. Years later, football would wonder, what if Arsene Wenger had never discovered George Weah? Would African football history have looked different? Would millions have found the same inspiration? Thankfully, we never had to find out. At Monaco, Weah adapted quickly. The goals arrived. The performances improved. The reputation grew. But this was only the beginning. Because George Weah wasn't traveling to Europe to participate. He was traveling to conquer it. His next destination was Paris Saint-Germain. And this was where Europe truly discovered George Weah. Champions League nights. Packed stadiums. The biggest opponents. The biggest stages. And George Weah looked like he belonged there. One goal against Bayern Munich became legendary. Collecting the ball deep inside his own half, Weah accelerated forward, past one defender, then another, then another. The stadium watched in disbelief. The defenders chased shadows, and moments later the ball was in the net. It wasn't just a goal. It was a statement. George Weah had arrived. By 1995, he had become one of the finest footballers on the planet. Then came the moment that changed everything. The Ballon d'Or ceremony. The room fell silent. The envelope opened. And football history changed forever. George Weah had won the Ballon d'Or. For Europe, it was an award ceremony. For Africa, it was history. For the first time ever, the best footballer on earth came from Africa. Think about that. An entire continent finally saw one of its own standing at the summit of world football. To this day, George Weah remains the only African player to win the Ballon d'Or. One statistic, one achievement, one piece of football history that may never be matched. But perhaps the greatest part of the story wasn't the trophy itself. It was what happened afterwards. Because suddenly young African footballers believed. They believed they could play in Europe. They believed they could compete with the world's best. They believed they could become the world's best. George Weah didn't open the door. He kicked it down. Soon afterwards, he joined AC Milan, one of the biggest clubs in world football. And once again he proved he belonged. Serie A was football's toughest league. The world's greatest defenders played there. Yet George Weah continued scoring, continued winning, continued inspiring. One of his most famous goals perfectly captured who he was. Winning possession near his own penalty area, Weah started running, and kept running. Past midfield, past defenders, past exhausted opponents. Almost the entire length of the pitch, before calmly finishing. A goal so extraordinary that supporters still talk about it decades later. Power, speed, technique, composure. Few players possessed everything George Weah possessed. Most football stories end here. The trophies are won. The career is celebrated. The legend retires. But George Weah's story was different. Because after football, he returned home. Not to celebrate success, to serve. The football dream was complete. Most people would have stopped there. George Weah was just getting started. He entered politics. He worked to improve the country that had shaped him, and eventually achieved something almost unimaginable. George Weah became president of Liberia. Think about that journey. A boy from Monrovia, a Ballon d'Or winner, a president. Football has produced many legends. Football has produced many superstars. But football has rarely produced a life story like George Weah's. One of Weah's most famous beliefs was simple. I believe in hard work, and I believe in destiny. Perhaps his life proved both. Because millions of African children dreamed. George Weah achieved. Millions faced obstacles. George Weah overcame them. Millions hoped. George Weah inspired. And that is why George Weah will always remain a true footballing icon. Not because he scored incredible goals. Not because he won the Ballon d'Or. Not because he became president. But because he made Africa believe. Before George Weah, it seemed impossible. After George Weah, the impossible suddenly felt achievable. And that may be the greatest legacy any footballer can leave behind. What is your favorite George Weah memory? Roberto Carlos, the man who redefined what was possible. The ball was traveling away from goal. Thousands inside the stadium thought the chance had gone. The goalkeeper didn't even move. Then the impossible happened. Nearly 30 years later, football fans still replay the moment. Scientists have studied it. Players have tried to copy it. And people still ask the same question. How did Roberto Carlos do that? Because for his entire career, Roberto Carlos made the impossible look normal. And in doing so, he changed football forever. Before Roberto Carlos, fullbacks defended. They stayed in position. They protected their goalkeeper. Then Roberto Carlos arrived. And suddenly everything changed. Born in Gareth, Brazil, in 1973, his journey began far from football's grandest stages. As a child, he helped his family by working on coffee plantations. Life wasn't easy. Money was limited. But he had something special. An incredible left foot, explosive speed, and the belief that anything was possible. As he developed, coaches quickly realized he wasn't a normal defender. He attacked relentlessly. He ran endlessly. And he struck the ball harder than almost anyone in football. Goalkeepers feared his free kicks. Defenders feared his pace. Managers feared giving him space. Europe soon came calling. His first major move was to Inter Milan. But football history almost took a different path. Inter looked at Roberto Carlos and saw a defender. Real Madrid looked at Roberto Carlos and saw a weapon. One coach believed he attacked too much. Imagine that. A manager thinking Roberto Carlos moved forward too often. Years later, football fans would ask, what if Inter Milan had understood what they had? Instead, they let him leave. And Real Madrid gladly welcomed him. At Madrid, Roberto Carlos found the perfect stage. The Bernabeu. Champions League nights. Packed stadiums. The Galacticos. And week after week he delivered. The tackles. The assists. The overlapping runs. The thunderous strikes. Then came France. The moment that would define his career. The ball sat over 30 yards from goal. The angle looked impossible. The distance looked impossible. The whistle blew. Roberto Carlos ran forward and unleashed a strike that football has never forgotten. The ball appeared to be traveling wide. The goalkeeper barely reacted. The crowd watched. Then suddenly the ball began to bend. More, and more, and more, until it crashed into the net. The stadium erupted. Football had never seen anything quite like it. It wasn't just a goal. It was football's greatest magic trick. But Roberto Carlos was far more than one free kick. At Real Madrid he won league titles, Champions Leagues, and became one of the defining players of an era. Alongside Zidane, Figo, Ronaldo, and Beckham. He helped build one of football's greatest teams. One statistic captures just how unique he was. Roberto Carlos scored more than 100 professional goals as a left-back. Even today, that sounds unbelievable. Then came 2002, the World Cup. Brazil arrived with enormous expectations, and with players like Ronaldo, Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, and Roberto Carlos, they looked unstoppable. Match by match they moved closer, until finally Brazil lifted the World Cup. The boy who once worked on coffee plantations had become a world champion. Yet perhaps his greatest achievement wasn't a trophy. It was influence. Can you imagine telling a modern fullback they aren't allowed to attack? Today it sounds ridiculous. Before Roberto Carlos, it was normal. After Roberto Carlos, everything changed. Young defenders wanted to score goals, take free kicks, create chances, attack without fear. The position evolved because of players like him. Football has produced faster players. Football has produced stronger players. Football has produced players with greater technical ability. But football has rarely produced anyone quite like Roberto Carlos. Because years later, people still ask about that free kick. How did it bend? How was it possible? The truth is, Roberto Carlos spent his entire career doing things that didn't seem possible. And that is why Roberto Carlos will always remain a true footballing icon. Not because of one free kick. Not because of the trophies. Not because of the World Cup. But because he changed football forever. Before Roberto Carlos, fullbacks defended. After Roberto Carlos, they attacked. Before Roberto Carlos, defenders followed the rules. After Roberto Carlos, they dreamed bigger. Roberto Carlos didn't just redefine a position. He redefined what was possible. What is your favorite Roberto Carlos moment? Doctors told him he had a serious eye condition. Many wondered if his career was over. Some believed he would never be the same player again. Instead, Edgar Davids became one of the most recognizable footballers in world football. Because some players accept obstacles, Edgar Davids attacked them. Football remembers the goggles. But football should remember the mentality. Because Edgar Davids never allowed anything to stop him. When football fans think of Edgar Davids, they immediately think of the goggles. The image became iconic. Recognizable in every stadium. Recognizable in every country. But the goggles tell only part of the story. The real story is about resilience. The real story is about determination. The real story is about refusing to quit when life tells you to. Born in Suriname in 1973 before moving to the Netherlands, Davids grew up with football in his blood. From a young age, coaches noticed two things: his talent and his intensity. While others played football, Davids battled through it. Every training session, every challenge, every match. They called him the Pitbull. And once you watched him play, you understood why. He chased every ball, pressed every opponent, fought for every inch of the pitch. Long before pressing became fashionable, Edgar Davids was already doing it. His rise through Ajax's academy placed him among one of football's greatest young teams. This wasn't simply a good side. It was one of the greatest generations football has ever seen. Clarence Seedorf, Patrick Kluivert, Mark Overmars, Edwin van der Sar. And right in the middle of it all, Edgar Davids. In 1995, Ajax conquered Europe and lifted the Champions League. The young Pitbull had reached the summit of club football. Most players would have been satisfied. Edgar Davids wanted more. Then came Italy, the toughest league in the world, the home of tactical football, the home of elite defending. Many players struggled there. Davids thrived. Italian football was built on control, built on discipline, built on organization. Then Edgar Davids arrived like a storm. At Juventus, he became one of the most complete midfielders in football. The tackles, the energy, the aggression, the leadership. He could win the ball, carry the ball, create chances, score goals. Few midfielders could do everything. Edgar Davids could. Then came the greatest challenge of his career. Doctors diagnosed him with glaucoma, a serious eye condition. For many players, it would have been the end. For some, it would have destroyed their confidence. Questions quickly followed. Could he still play? Could he still compete? Would he ever be the same again? Most players would have seen the diagnosis as the ending. Edgar Davids saw another challenge. Instead of giving up, he adapted. He wore protective sports goggles, something football had rarely seen before. People noticed immediately. Some doubted him. Some questioned him. Edgar Davids answered the questions the only way he knew how: by performing. The goggles became a symbol, not of weakness, not of limitation. A symbol of resilience. One of the most remarkable chapters of his career came at Barcelona. The club was struggling. Confidence was low. Results were inconsistent. Davids arrived on loan. Everything changed. Barcelona surged up the table. The team found balance. The team found belief. Many supporters still point to his arrival as a turning point. One statistic captures the respect he earned throughout football. He played for Ajax, Juventus, Barcelona, Inter Milan, and Tottenham Hotspur. Some of the biggest clubs in world football. Everywhere he went, he left his mark. One of Davids' most famous beliefs was simple: when I step onto the pitch, I want to win every duel. And that perfectly describes his career. Every duel, every challenge, every battle. He wanted to win them all. Football has produced more elegant midfielders. Football has produced more creative midfielders. But football has rarely produced a competitor quite like Edgar Davids. Years later, fans still remember the goggles, the tackles, the energy, the intensity. But his real legacy is something much bigger. Every time life put an obstacle in front of him, he found a way through it. Every time someone doubted him, he answered on the pitch. Edgar Davids didn't become great because life was easy. He became great because he refused to stop. And that is why Edgar Davids will always remain a true footballing icon. Not because of the goggles. Not because of the trophies. Not because of the clubs he played for. But because he showed the world that setbacks do not have to become endings. Football remembers the goggles. But football should remember the mentality. Because Edgar Davids never allowed anything to stop him. What is your favorite Edgar Davids memory? Germany had reached the World Cup final. Oliver Kahn had been almost unbeatable all tournament. One hand on football immortality. One hand on the golden ball. Then the ball slipped from his grasp. For weeks, he had looked invincible. For weeks, he had carried an entire nation. Then, in a single moment, football reminded the world that even giants can fall. But here's the strange thing. That isn't why we remember Oliver Kahn. We remember him because for over a decade he became the one thing every striker hated seeing. Oliver Kahn wasn't just a goalkeeper. He was the goalkeeper everyone feared. When Oliver Kahn stood in goal, he didn't look nervous. He didn't look calm. He looked angry. Like a man personally offended that someone was trying to score. The glare, the shouting, the intensity, the presence. Everything about him sent the same message. Not today. Born in Karlsruhe, Germany, in 1969, Kahn's journey began like many others. A young boy chasing a dream. A young goalkeeper learning his craft. But even then there was something different about him. His competitiveness. His determination. His refusal to accept defeat. Winning wasn't something Oliver Kahn hoped for. Winning was something he expected. As his reputation grew, he established himself at Karlsruhe SC before attracting the attention of Germany's biggest clubs. Then came the move that changed everything. Bayern Munich. At Bayern, success wasn't optional. Pressure wasn't occasional. It was constant. The expectations were enormous. The scrutiny relentless. It was the perfect club for Oliver Kahn. While many goalkeepers relied purely on reflexes, Kahn relied on something else. Presence. Opponents felt it. Defenders felt it. Managers felt it. And eventually football gave him a nickname. The Titan. Not because of his size, but because of his presence. Because whenever Oliver Kahn stepped onto the pitch, he seemed larger than everyone around him. Kahn demanded perfection. From himself. From his teammates. From everyone around him. Mistakes were unacceptable. Excuses were unacceptable. Anything less than maximum effort was unacceptable. Some found him intimidating. Some found him difficult. Most simply respected him. As the years passed, Bayern Munich continued winning trophies. League titles. Domestic cups. European success. And standing behind it all was the Titan. One of the defining moments of his club career arrived in 2001. The Champions League final against Valencia. The match went to penalties. The pressure was enormous. Millions were watching. This was where legends are made. Oliver Kahn saved 3 penalties. 3. Bayern Munich were champions of Europe. The goalkeeper everyone feared had delivered again. Yet the greatest challenge of his career still lay ahead. The 2002 World Cup. Germany arrived without the superstars of previous generations. Many doubted them. Few expected them to reach the final. Oliver Kahn had other ideas. Match after match, he produced extraordinary performances. Save after save. Game after game. Germany kept advancing. And one truth became impossible to ignore. Oliver Kahn was carrying them. His saves crushed opponents. His leadership inspired teammates. His mentality drove the entire team forward. The Titan was playing the football of his life. Then came the final. Germany versus Brazil. The biggest stage in football. For most of the tournament, Kahn had looked unbeatable, untouchable, almost superhuman. Then football reminded everyone of its cruelty. A shot from Ronaldo, a rare mistake, a rebound, a goal. Brazil would win the World Cup. The goalkeeper everyone feared had finally been beaten. For many players, that moment would define their career. For Oliver Kahn, it became only one chapter. Because when the tournament ended, football recognized what the world had witnessed. Oliver Kahn won the Golden Ball. To this day, he remains the only goalkeeper in football history to be named the best player at a World Cup. Think about that. Every goalkeeper who has ever played the game. Every World Cup in history. Only one has done it. Oliver Kahn. 8 Bundesliga titles. 6 German Cups. A Champions League. A World Cup Golden Ball. The statistics are extraordinary. But statistics don't explain Oliver Kahn. What explains Oliver Kahn is mentality. Pressure made him stronger. Expectation made him sharper. Responsibility made him better. The bigger the occasion, the better he became. Years later, football fans still remember the glare, the shouting, the intensity, the saves. But what football truly remembers is the feeling. The feeling that if Oliver Kahn stood between you and the goal, scoring suddenly felt impossible. And that is why Oliver Kahn will always remain a true footballing icon. Not because of the trophies, not because of the records, not because of the awards, but because he changed the way people thought about goalkeepers. He wasn't simply protecting the goal. He was defending a fortress. Football remembers the saves. Football remembers the trophies. Football remembers the titan. But football truly remembers the fear. Because Oliver Kahn wasn't just a great goalkeeper. He was the goalkeeper everyone feared. What is your favorite Oliver Kahn memory? At the age of 21, Tony Adams became captain of Arsenal Football Club. Most players spend years earning that responsibility. Most players wait for that opportunity. Tony Adams carried it before most footballers reach their prime. He was a leader, a winner, a future legend. And he was slowly destroying himself. Because while supporters saw the captain, Tony Adams was fighting a battle nobody else could see. This is not just a football story. It's a story about mistakes. It's a story about consequences. It's a story about redemption. And it's a story about getting back up when life knocks you down. Because Tony Adams didn't become a legend because he never fell. He became a legend because he refused to stay down. Born in Romford, England, in 1966, Adams joined Arsenal as a schoolboy and quickly rose through the club's ranks. From the beginning, coaches noticed something special. Not flair, not tricks, not natural showmanship. Leadership, commitment, character. The qualities that separate good players from great captains. By 21, Tony Adams was Arsenal captain. An extraordinary responsibility for a player so young. And perhaps the most remarkable part is that nobody expected him to become Arsenal's greatest captain. He wasn't the glamorous superstar. He wasn't football's biggest celebrity. Some players are born stars. Tony Adams became one. Through hard work. Through resilience. Through leadership. Managers changed. Players came and went. Football evolved. Tony Adams remained the captain. For 14 years, Arsenal looked to one man for leadership, and more often than not, he delivered. Around him, Arsenal built one of football's most famous defences. Lee Dixon, Nigel Winterburn, Steve Bold, Martin Keown. And at the centre of it all stood Tony Adams. Strong, fearless, commanding. Together they became Arsenal's famous back four, a defence built on discipline, organisation, trust, and leadership. But away from football, Tony Adams was losing control. Alcohol had become a serious problem. At first, it seemed manageable. Then it wasn't. The drinking became worse. The consequences became greater. Eventually everything caught up with him. In 1990, Adams was sentenced to prison for drink driving. The captain of Arsenal, an England international, one of the country's most recognizable footballers, now sitting behind bars. It was the lowest point of his life, the moment many believed would define him forever. Some thought his career would never recover. Some thought his reputation never would either. For the first time in his life, there were no teammates, no supporters, no football, just Tony Adams, and the consequences of his choices. For the first time, he had nowhere to hide. Many people never recover from moments like that. Tony Adams decided he would. After years of struggle, he made the decision that saved his life. He stopped drinking. Not for a few weeks. Not for a few months. For good. The battle wasn't easy. There were difficult days. There were challenges. But Tony Adams kept fighting. Because this wasn't about football anymore. This was about survival. Then came another turning point. Arsene Wenger arrived at Arsenal. Many believed Tony Adams was nearing the end. Football was changing. The game was becoming faster, more demanding. Yet Wenger saw something others didn't. A leader, a winner, a captain. Wenger helped save the footballer. Tony Adams saved the man. Together, they helped create one of the greatest final chapters any footballer has ever written. Then came one of the most iconic moments of his career. Arsenal versus Everton. The title was within touching distance. The crowd were celebrating. The season was almost complete. Then something unforgettable happened. Tony Adams surged forward. The centre-back. The captain. The man many thought was finished. The ball arrived. He struck it perfectly. Goal. The commentator's words became immortal. Would you believe it? Millions watching around the world could. Because nobody represented Arsenal Football Club better than Tony Adams. One statistic captures his importance. Tony Adams captained Arsenal for 14 years. 14. Managers changed. Players came and went. Football evolved. Tony Adams remained. Even more remarkably, he won league titles in 3 different decades. The 1980s, the 1990s, and the 2000s. 4 league titles. 4 different Arsenal teams. 1 captain. Very few players in football history can say the same. Yet perhaps his greatest achievement came away from football. After overcoming his own struggles, Adams dedicated himself to helping others. Through sporting chants, he helped athletes battling addiction and mental health challenges. The man who once needed help was now providing it. And that might be the most important victory of all. Football has produced quicker defenders. Football has produced more elegant defenders. Football has produced more naturally gifted defenders. But football has rarely produced a greater example of redemption. Football remembers the trophies. Football remembers the captain. Football remembers the famous back four. But football should also remember the lesson. Because Tony Adams proved that your worst mistake does not have to become your final chapter. Years later, Arsenal supporters still sing his name. Not because he was perfect. Because he wasn't. They remember him because he faced his mistakes. Because he changed. Because he fought back. Tony Adams didn't become a legend because life was easy. He became a legend because he refused to stay down. And that is why Tony Adams will always remain a true footballing icon. Not because he was Arsenal's captain. Not because he lifted trophies. Not because he played hundreds of matches. But because he proved something every person needs to hear. No matter how far you fall, you can still rise again. What is your favorite Tony Adams memory? Real Madrid had Zidane. Real Madrid had Figo. Real Madrid had Ronaldo. Real Madrid had Raúl. Real Madrid even signed David Beckham. And somehow, the player they missed most was Claude Makélélé. Think about that. One of the most talented teams in football history. One of the most famous teams in football history. Yet the player they couldn't replace wasn't the superstar. It wasn't the goal scorer. It wasn't the headline maker. It was Claude Makélélé. Because football remembers the stars. But the smartest people in football remember the players who make the stars shine. Born in Kinshasa, in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, in 1973, Makélélé's journey was far from glamorous. His family moved to France when he was young. Football quickly became his passion. But unlike many future stars, he didn't possess the qualities that usually attract attention. He wasn't scoring spectacular goals. He wasn't producing flashy skills. He wasn't appearing on magazine covers. Instead, he mastered something far more important: doing whatever the team needed. As his career developed through Nantes, Marseille, and Celta Vigo, Makélélé earned a reputation for hard work and intelligence. He understood space. He understood danger. He understood responsibility. The jobs most players avoided. The jobs most supporters never noticed. Some people called players like him water carriers, workers, support players. The smartest minds in football saw something very different. They saw the foundation everything else was built upon. Eventually he arrived at Real Madrid, the home of superstars, the home of Galacticos. Zidane, Figo, Ronaldo, Roberto Carlos. Names that filled stadiums around the world. And quietly behind them all stood Claude Makélélé. Every great orchestra needs a conductor. Every great building needs foundations. Every great football team needs balance. Makélélé provided that balance. When attackers surged forward, he covered. When defenders were exposed, he protected them. When matches became chaotic, he restored order. The stars got the applause. Makélélé got the responsibility. The stars got the headlines. Makélélé got the hard work. And he never complained. The strange thing about truly important people is that nobody notices them when everything is working. Nobody talks about electricity when the lights are on. They only notice when everything goes dark. In 2003, Real Madrid allowed him to leave. Many supporters barely reacted. Many believed he could easily be replaced. After all, they still had the Galacticos. What difference could one midfielder make? Football was about to find out. Makélélé joined Chelsea. Real Madrid moved on without him. Yet something strange happened. The stars remained. The balance disappeared. The trophies became harder to find. Suddenly, the player many considered replaceable looked irreplaceable. Years later, fans would look back and ask, was selling Claude Makélélé Real Madrid's biggest mistake? At Chelsea, the answer became clearer every season. José Mourinho arrived and immediately understood what he had. Mourinho knew something many others didn't. The best teams aren't built around stars. They're built around balance. Claude was that balance. Chelsea became one of the strongest teams England had ever seen. League titles, records, dominance. Not because Makélélé scored goals. Not because he chased headlines. Because he allowed everyone else to be at their best. One famous quote perfectly explains his value. When discussing Makélélé's departure from Real Madrid, it was said, "Why put another layer of gold paint on a Bentley when you're losing the entire engine?" The stars were the paint. Claude Makélélé was the engine. And suddenly the entire football world understood. Most children dream of becoming Zidane. Most children dream of becoming Ronaldo. Most children dream of becoming Ronaldinho. Very few dream of becoming Claude Makélélé. Yet every manager wanted a player exactly like him. Because managers understand something supporters eventually learn. The most important player isn't always the most famous. Football has produced more skillful midfielders. Football has produced more creative midfielders. Football has produced midfielders who scored more goals. But football has rarely produced a player who understood his role better than Claude Makélélé. Week after week, season after season, he did exactly what his team needed. Nothing more, nothing less. Years later, modern football is full of holding midfielders, players who protect the defense, control transitions, provide balance. Before Rodri, before Sergio Busquets, before countless others mastered the role, there was Claude Makélélé. And his influence can still be seen every weekend across world football. Football remembers the goals. Football remembers the superstars. Football remembers the Galacticos. But football also remembers Claude Makélélé. Not because he chased fame. Not because he chased headlines. Not because he demanded attention. Because he made greatness possible. The stars shone brighter because he was there. The teams were stronger because he was there. The trophies arrived because he was there. And in the end, football gave him the ultimate compliment. It named a position after him. And that is why Claude Makélélé will always remain a true footballing icon. Not because he scored spectacular goals. Not because he dominated newspaper headlines. But because he proved something every great team eventually learns. The most important player in the room isn't always the loudest. Sometimes, it's the one doing the work nobody notices. What is your favorite Claude Makélélé memory? The Champions League final. Real Madrid against Liverpool. The biggest club match in world football. The score was level. The pressure was immense. Millions were watching around the globe. Then Gareth Bale did something nobody expected. A bicycle kick. Perfectly struck. Perfectly timed. Perfectly unforgettable. It wasn't just one of the greatest goals in Champions League history. It became another entry on a growing list of moments that defined Gareth Bale's career. Because some players spend their careers waiting for a defining moment. Gareth Bale collected them. Born in Cardiff, Wales, in 1989, Bale's football journey almost ended before it truly began. As a youngster, he was initially rejected before eventually earning his opportunity. Many players hear no and disappear. Gareth Bale used it as motivation. Soon his pace and talent became impossible to ignore, and Tottenham Hotspur came calling. His early years at Spurs weren't easy. For a long time, Tottenham struggled to win matches when Bale played. Some supporters even labelled him unlucky. Many doubted him. New challenge. Same response. Then came the night that changed everything. Tottenham against Inter Milan. Champions League football. Standing in Bale's way was Makélélé, one of the world's best defenders. By the end of the night, he was chasing shadows. The pace, the power, the fearlessness. The football world suddenly realized something. Gareth Bale belonged among the elite. Over the following seasons, he became one of football's most dangerous players. Goals, assists, match-winning performances. Then came another challenge. A world record move to Real Madrid. The biggest club in football. The biggest spotlight in football. The biggest expectations in football. Many dream of wearing the famous white shirt. Few thrive under the pressure. The 2014 Copa del Rey final. Real Madrid against Barcelona. The score was level. The trophy was within reach. The ball looked lost. The defender had the advantage. The angle seemed impossible. Then Gareth Bale did something only Gareth Bale could do. He sprinted past Marc Bartra, almost running off the pitch to get around him. Seconds later, the ball was in the net. Real Madrid had their winner. Big moment. Big player. Just weeks later came another final. The Champions League final. Real Madrid chasing La Decima. Again, Gareth Bale delivered, scoring a crucial goal as Real Madrid finally lifted their 10th European Cup. Another final. Another defining moment. Most players would have been satisfied. Gareth Bale wasn't finished. Then came Kiev, Liverpool, Champions League final. The biggest stage, the biggest audience, the biggest pressure, and the greatest goal of his career. A bicycle kick that seemed impossible. A goal that left teammates speechless. A goal that left supporters stunned. Some players spend their careers waiting for a defining moment. Gareth Bale collected them. But trophies alone do not explain Gareth Bale's legacy. Because Real Madrid gave him success. Wales gave him immortality. 4 generations, Welsh supporters dreamed of seeing their nation compete on football's biggest stages. For decades, that dream remained out of reach. Then Gareth Bale arrived. At Euro 2016, Wales achieved the impossible. A nation of just a few million people reached the semi-finals. The world watched in amazement. Wales believed. And Gareth Bale led the way. Real Madrid had many superstars. Wales had one. Then came another dream. The World Cup. Wales had not appeared at football's biggest tournament since 1958. 64 years of waiting. Once again, Gareth Bale delivered, helping end a wait that had lasted more than half a century. A nation united. A dream fulfilled. 5 Champions Leagues. League titles. Domestic trophies. Historic international achievements. The statistics are extraordinary. But statistics don't explain Gareth Bale. What explains Gareth Bale is pressure. Every chapter of his career came with expectations. Every chapter came with doubt. Every chapter came with pressure. And every chapter seemed to end the same way. With Gareth Bale delivering. Football remembers the bicycle kick. Football remembers the run against Barcelona. Football remembers the Champions League finals. Wales remembers something even bigger. Hope. Because Gareth Bale gave an entire nation moments it thought it might never see. Some players spend their careers waiting for a defining moment. Gareth Bale collected them. And that is why Gareth Bale will always remain a true footballing icon. Not because he was the fastest. Not because he was the most famous. Not because he won 5 Champions Leagues. But because when the moment was biggest, when the pressure was highest, when everything was on the line, Gareth Bale delivered. He wasn't just a great footballer. He was a player built for the biggest moments. Before we finish today's episode, I'd like to thank every single person who has liked, commented, shared, followed and subscribed this week. Your support helps keep True Footballing Icons growing and allows these incredible football stories to reach more fans around the world. Whether you've been here from the beginning or you've only just discovered the channel this week, thank you. We've looked at some incredible footballers over the last 7 days. George Weah, Roberto Carlos, Edgar Davids, Oliver Kahn, Tony Adams, Claude Makélélé, and Gareth Bale. But now I want to hear from you. Who has been your favorite player we featured this week? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss another footballing icon. Until next time, thank you for watching True Footballing Icons.